Since 1921, the Detroit Historical Society has been capturing and documenting stories to preserve our history, stories that help us better understand the events and the people that influence the world around us. And of course, the pandemic has not stopped their very, very important work. With us here on the MegaCast is Rebecca Salmonen Witt. She is the Chief Development and Communications Officer for the Detroit Historical Society. Great to have you with us again.
Thank you so much for having me. I was excited to come back.
Rebecca, can you agree with me about the lipstick and the mask thing?
Completely. I actually, this weekend was washing the inside of masks.
Right. See, I'm not alone and going through the problems that we go through as women during this pandemic. Maybe that's something that you can document there at the Detroit Historical Society.
Well, you know what? We've got an oral history project that's specifically about people's experiences during the pandemic. And I'm waiting. Maybe, Ronnie, maybe you can call in and your oral history can be about the trials and tribulations of applying and continuously applying lipstick behind a mask.
Well, I wondered from a business standpoint, how much their sales in the cosmetic industry, has it gone up or gone down because of the way we're living and we're working right now? And a lot of people are saying, well, I'm hardly wearing makeup right now, except for those Zoom calls. So
eye makeup, skyrocketing, lipstick, not so much.
Right, exactly. But with that, it's a sad time for our country, Rebecca, but it's also, from a historical standpoint, has to be somewhat fascinating as well.
Well, you know what? When this whole thing started, we said, literally, your historical society was made for this time. Because one of the things that we do that people don't often think about is document history as it's happening. And we document history as it's happening so that people 50 years, 100 years from now who are going through the next pandemic have something to base their actions on. Some of the stuff that we've done now has been based upon the pandemic that happened in 1918, 100 years ago, right? So it really is important work. And though I, kind of talked about what your potential oral history could be in just, everybody's stories from this time are really important, and that's why we're collecting them.
And one thing we have that they didn't have 100 years ago are technology, because I wonder how the stories would be different if they had our technology today from 100 years ago, because now we're all trying to find out as much as we can about the pandemic during that time and how they were living, and there's not really a lot of information out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly it's much more possible for us to gather stories from every corner of our community. It's a lot easier to provide your story. Back in 1918, it was the hard work of collecting stories one by one and writing them down as people were telling you. And now you can literally type up your story and email it to us. You can call us on the phone and leave a voicemail. It's so much easier now that the volume of material that we're able to collect, to your point, is a lot greater. So we should have a really good record of this time, for, God forbid, this situation ever happen again, but for the next folks who have to face something similar.
Right, and history is so important to help guide us through some of these times that we are experiencing. But the one thing about the written word, it has survived, but we have so many different platforms of technology. So when you're documenting history today, whether it deals with the pandemic or something else, are you worried about the various platforms that are available and that maybe they're not going to be in use 50 years or 100 years from now? Because I don't know about you, but I don't have an 8-track tape deck in my basement. I do have 8-track tapes because of my husband. He's a hoarder, but I do not have the deck to play them on. So does that play into your thought process?
It does. And incidentally, we've got the deck to play them at the Historical Society because we put together all that sort of now ancient technology so that we can continue to use those things. And, it's wonderful to have such a great staff of professional curators at the Society, because they're the tricky folks who understand what will and will not survive, to the best of our knowledge now, how to preserve things like Zoom conversations, so that we can all remember in 20 years, like, oh yeah, that was that weird thing we used to do during the pandemic, right? But we'll be able to preserve those with the appropriate technology, so that they'll be available for future generations.
You have such a fascinating job there, and being able to be a part of so many stories. But where do things stand in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis? We're 11 months in, but are you open for visitors? How is that working right now?
Well, thank you for asking, because we are open. In fact, we've been open since July 10th, and we operate two museums, so the Dawson Great Lakes Museum on Belle Isle and the Detroit Historical Museum right downtown in Detroit on Woodward in Midtown. Both museums are open. We do have limited time, so they're open Thursday through Sunday. 10 a.m. to 5 on Thursday through Saturday, 1 to 5 on Sunday. But both museums have new exhibits right now. We just opened a new exhibit at the Dawson called the Last Ice. It's about ice fishing on the Great Lakes. It's fascinating. It's been really popular just in its opening weekend. New exhibit at the Maine Museum as well, called Boomtown, and that's actually celebrating our centennial. So we're turning 100 years old this year. We're becoming a historical artifact ourselves. Boomtown celebrates actually that whole decade of the 20s. It's a fascinating exhibit, and people are loving it. So not only are we open, we are continuing to put new exhibits up. We've got all the COVID safety protocols that folks need and want to feel safe. So we do timed ticketing. Those tickets are available online. It makes sure that neither of our museums are overrun at any given time. You've got lots of space to feel safe in. All the sanitizing, we've got the arrows on the floor, all of those things people have come to expect and need to feel safe. Those are in place at your museum. So we encourage everybody to come down. It's a great thing to do on a day when it's gray like today and there's a bunch of snow outside.
Oh my gosh, right now is a great time to be indoors. Hey, Rebecca, before I get to the ice fishing exhibit, because I do want to talk about that. Ice fishing, of course, here in our local area has been a huge thing. But let's talk about Boomtown, because someone else pointed out to me, Tyler, not long ago, hey, coming out of the last pandemic, the roaring 20s. So what do you think is going to happen for us coming out of the pandemic right now? Are we going into a new version of the roaring 20s? Because I will tell you, I've already warned everyone, if I see you, you're getting a hug.
That's right. Well, I think there were a lot of parts about the 20s that were really great, and I'm all for bringing those back in our next iteration after we get this pandemic handled. It's people are talking about, we are poised to come, sort of our economy, our society come back, open up in a way that is very open and, sort of rejoicing in our ability to be together. And I think that would be a great outcome and a great, very similar to the Roaring 20s. So we're hoping.
I'm ready for it. I don't know about you, but watch out. The parties are coming. But with that, let's talk a little bit about your ice fishing and the exhibit there, because here we had Cass Lake and Sylvan Lake. They had their big ice fest this weekend, which I will say I don't know how I've lived in Kegel Harbor as long as I have and didn't know about the Cass Lake pop-up ice fest. It was huge. This is really a big part of our community.
It really is. We had this opportunity to collaborate with photographer Amy Sacca, installation artist Scott Hawking, another photographer, Valerian Morris, and another artist as well, to put this on. Amy kind of was the engine behind it. She started ice fishing with her father a few years ago, maybe a decade or so ago, really as a way to spend time with him. And she, as a photographer, of course, documented their time together and noticed over the course of several years that whereas they used to start their ice fishing adventures every winter in December or so, it was getting later and later every year. She started going around the whole Great Lakes region to document ice fishing everywhere in the Great Lakes, and really ended up kind of traveling around looking for places where they had ice. And so she named the exhibition Last Ice, and it's really kind of about that intersection behind this activity that really is important to people on the Great Lakes. You know, it's really a part of our culture. I've ice fished for years, and you know, most people I know have at least taken one trek out there to peer down the hole and, you know, look for the fish. And so that intersection with the intersection of climate change and what's going on here, that we can't go out ice fishing in December anymore because there's open water still at that time. And so the exhibition itself is beautiful. Amy's photography and Valorian's photography is gorgeous. It's both inside and outside the museum. So for your viewers, at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum last year, we completed this project of sort of renovating all of the outside spaces at our museum. So for the very first time, the grounds, which are this gorgeous riverfront site, are also available as a museum goer. And so this is kind of our first exhibit to really take advantage of that and use those outdoor spaces as well as indoor spaces for a gallery for the photography too.
That is so awesome. Tell us about the other new exhibit, Boomtown.
Boomtown. So Boomtown is in our lower level at the Detroit Historical Museum, everybody's favorite Streets of Old Detroit. It's really kind of a part of that. It focuses on the story of 20 unique Detroiters from the 20s, sort of that whole decade, follows their unique trips around. And it's kind of the stories of the people, some who you may have heard of and some who you never would have heard of, who made Detroit what it was at that time, which was a really formative time for our city. It's kind of when our city became the city that we know and love today, both from an architecture standpoint, but also sort of from its societal standpoint, what it meant to people. And so we've got everything from, you know, a 15-year-old girl who was a rum runner during Prohibition. Dr. Ossian Sweet is in that exhibit. We've got an early 20s suffragette is in that display. So there's everything from folks from high society to folks who were just sort of doing the work to make sure that Detroit could become what it eventually did, that we're proud to be a part of right now.
Rebecca Salmonen Witt with us here on the MegaCast. She's the Chief Development and Communications Officer for the Detroit Historical Society. By far, someone with one of the coolest jobs within the city of Detroit. You guys are doing a new podcast now?
We are, yeah. So we just started. Podcasts are a lot harder than we thought they might be. The Historical Society has a ton of content. And so we're just always looking for new ways to get that content out to people because it's so fascinating. This fall, we opened another new exhibit. It's called Detroit's Brewing Heritage, and it's about kind of the history of beer in Detroit. Also in the lower level, super fun. Don't miss it when you come to the society. The podcast is called Detroit Untold. So that's the name of the podcast. This chapter, if you will, is about beer. And so we interview all the folks, both people who had a historical role in brewing beer in the city and people who are brewing beer in the city now. And it's a really fun kind of ride. We just launched it, and we're super excited to see how people think of it.
So is it available on Apple or which platform?
Yep, all of your main platforms. So you can find it everywhere. Apple, Spotify. Yeah.
Great. It's like you said, though, podcasts are so much harder than people think. I'm starting up a new one with a former coworker. We were both reporters, and we're going to be covering some of the old stories that we covered. And it's so much harder than people think. It's like a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah, it's been in development for a year. So we wrote it, we rewrote it, we interviewed everybody, we wrote it again. Someone stole our original name. We had to rename it a couple of times. We had like over and over again. It was all these things that we never would have thought of. But like I said, we've got really engaging people at the Historical Society and really great content. So I think people are going to love it. And we've got lots of additional season ideas already stacked up. So
oh my
hopefully
God,
people will love it. We'll get a lot of new visitors out of it, and we will make a new season coming up soon.
so much content. That's going to be the tricky point, is like really trying to navigate through all that content, because sometimes too much content is just as hard as not having enough. Hey, quickly before we let you go, I know we're running a little late here though. Let's talk about your upcoming event, Bourbon and Bow Ties. First you got beer on the podcast. Now you have bourbon and bow ties. I love the Detroit Historical Society.
Sense of theme here.
It's a pandemic.
We started Bourbon and Bow Ties a couple of years ago, and it's been really a fun event. It's also an event that helps introduce the Historical Society and our museums to new audiences, which is important to us. So, that's kind of why we keep bringing it back, because it does have a whole new audience of people who get to see a museum a lot of times for the first time since they were like in third grade and they came on a school tour or something. This one is at the main museum, so the Detroit Historical Museum in Midtown. It is going to be on Saturday, the 27th of March, and it's basically arranged as a tour, and it's a kind of a tour from Kentucky to Detroit and back again. So you get to sample bourbons from all of those places. There are two stations where they're actually mixing drinks with it, so it's not merely a tasting, but also a drink mixing kind of, instructional piece. Ticket purchasers get their own sort of individual delicious box of snacks and desserts, and it's just going to be a fun day. So there's a couple of different options. I think one starts at 1 and one starts at 3. Tickets are still available, although they are going fast. So apparently there's a pent-up demand for bourbon in Detroit. Who would have thought?
Right, and in person as well, right?
Yeah. Yes, in person. So that's another, kind of fun piece about it. We do have a virtual drinking edition as well that does historic drinks. That's called Museum Mixology, and that'll be coming back this summer for another run as well.
Well, that's great. Rebecca, always fun having you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I always love to see you guys.
Great. Quickly before we say goodbye, give us your website again, because I would imagine that's also the place for people to get the information about everything we've talked about here today.
That's exactly right. All the exhibits are on there. Our open and closing hours are on there, and tickets for everything we do are on there as well. It's easy to remember. It's just DetroitHistorical.org.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Always great having you.